Hey there, it's Sara coming at you with a shorty episode of the No More Wasted Days podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to you all about habits and how you can start creating a new habit loop. And if you're thinking, what the heck is a habit loop? Don't worry, I'm going to teach you as we dive into this episode. Before we dive into this topic that I think is so powerful for anyone at any level on their alcohol-free journey, I want to invite you to download my free alcohol-free checklist if you have not done so already. The link to download the alcohol-free checklist is in the show notes of this episode. So just head to the show notes and you can download it as you're listening, and you're going to be set up with a cool list that gives you so many strategies so you're set up for success on your alcohol-free journey. Like I said, you can do this while you're listening, and by the end of this episode, the alcohol-free checklist will be waiting for you in your inbox. All right, let's dive into this topic. I love talking about habits. I always tell people that when I first quit drinking, one thing that really helped me was to look at my drinking in the terms of a habit. All of the things that revolved around my drinking were habits, and I had the power to change those habits if I could identify where they really came from. So that's what we're going to do today in this podcast episode. You're actually going to listen to me work through how I changed some of my habits, and then you in turn can do this with your own habits when it comes to drinking. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to first define the word habit. The word habit is defined as a regular tendency or practice, especially one that is hard to give up. I love that the dictionary felt the need to add, especially one that is hard to give up. I think that it just shows us like habits are deeply ingrained in us. And when we think about things like brushing our teeth or brushing our hair after a shower, they're all just habits. Heck, even the way we towel ourselves off after we take a shower is a habit. Every person does it their own way, but it's a habit that's deeply ingrained in you, and you do it the same way. It's repeated over and over. And I bet if you were to try to give up the method in which you towel yourself off after a shower, it would be really hard. So you can just think about it in terms of that. To me, a habit is something you do out of routine. And I was amazed when I first quit drinking just how much drinking had become a habit for me. And not just drinking, but thinking about alcohol was also a habit for me. When it was 3 p.m., I started thinking about what I would drink like clockwork. And that was just, it blew my mind that that had become a habit for me. When I would cook dinner, the instinct was to pour a glass of wine to go along with cooking dinner. If I was going to the grocery store, it was habit to go by the beer and wine section and see if there were any deals. If I was going to a friend's house for dinner, I was bringing something to drink and planning out how much I was going to drink. That was all a habit for me. And all of those things I had to start changing. And I think when you start to see those habits, it becomes easier for you to say, okay, there's a lot of habits here revolving around alcohol, but I have the power to change them if I can really get clear about what they are. So before we dive into changing those habits, I want you to do something. I want you to get out a piece of paper and pencil if you're not driving, obviously. If you're driving, save this for another time, but be sure to really do it. And I just want you to create a list of all of your habits when it comes to drinking. And like I did, do the ones where it's thinking about alcohol, do the ones where it's actually drinking the alcohol, and get super honest about these habits. Have no judgment around them. Just write them down. You're going to need this list because now we're going to start identifying what are called your habit loops. The idea of habit loops was brought to us in a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and I highly recommend reading that. I will put a link to it in the show notes of this episode so you can go check it out. But a habit loop is a combination of various elements that lead to producing a habit. So it's not just the habit, right? It's all of the things leading up to that habit. For instance, maybe you're stressed out and your first thought is, I'm going to drink. The emotion of being stressed triggered the response in you to turn to a drink. That starts to create the habit. If you can really start looking at your habits and then identifying the habit loops, then you can really start picking those apart and creating new habits. Look at your list of habits that you created when it comes to drinking. How are they a part of a habit loop? Are they intertwined together in a habit loop, or are they separate habit loops? Because you might find that some of your habits around alcohol are all part of the same habit loop. But really start looking at that, and to help you do that, I'm going to go through some of mine. Like I said, I would normally start the habit of thinking about drinking around 3 p.m. Well, why was this? It's actually because I'm a morning person. My mind is the strongest and most effective in the morning. By 3 p.m., my brain is really tired. So add that to my drinking brain being really tired. That's when I was ready to shut down work mode and just numb out with drinking. So the habit loop was I'm tired. I don't want to think hard anymore. I'm going to drink to numb my mind a little bit. That was the habit loop. I could start seeing that. And then I can actually start saying, okay, I'm going to change this habit loop, which we'll get to a little later, but I'm going to go through one more habit loop so you have another idea of how to do this for yourself. Like I said before, I liked to have a glass of wine when I was cooking dinner. It was like clockwork. If I was getting ready to cook dinner, I better uncork a bottle of wine, pour that wine, and get ready to sip on it as I was cooking. So now I'm going to break that down instead. Here's the deal. I love food. I kind of like cooking, but when I was a drinker, I would hold resentment that I was always the one cooking for the family. And that feeling would make me angry. Why wasn't my family helping? How did I get elected to be the family chef? And then I would feel angry or stressed, but drinking helped to ease that. Or so I thought. So that is my habit loop. When I really look to it and I say, okay, well, what's the deal with cooking? Okay, I could go into it and say, oh, sometimes I get angry when I'm cooking, or I feel full of resentment when I'm cooking because I'm the person who has to do it all the time. Now, I've actually done a lot of work around this area, and I don't mind so much that it's my job. And that's something that I'll talk about also when I teach you how to do that habit loop recreation. So go through your habits that you wrote down and start figuring out the habit loops that they're part of. What emotion triggers the habit of drinking, or what action triggers the habit of drinking? This allows you to start to see that you drink when you're angry, or maybe you drink when you're tired, or you drink when you're stressed, or you drink when you're happy. I drank for all occasions, but it still is super helpful to see the habit loop and to see those emotions so I can start making plans. So now, let's come up with new habits. So what do we know so far? A habit is something that we do over and over, and it's often associated with a habit loop. So basically, A happens, so then B happens. And that means we need to make a plan that says when A happens, we need a new B to happen. Let's go with my example of cooking dinner. I was tired and irritable and sometimes angry when I would cook dinner for my family. And these feelings were still happening for me when I first quit drinking, and I needed to navigate those feelings without picking up a glass of wine. So I started planning a fun drink to have when I'd make dinner. A lot of times it was just LaCroix with a squeeze of lime. So nothing too wild, but it's there. I still do this. When I'm about to make dinner, I pour my tonic water, put my little splash of grapefruit juice into it, and my little splash of lime juice, and then I'm ready to make dinner. I pour it into my little insulated wine glass that I still have today, and it just makes me feel like, okay, I'm ready. I gave myself a little treat for this mundane chore that I have to do all the time. That's one way I changed that habit loop. And it truly is my go-to. But the thing is, it doesn't give me a buzz. So I needed that buzz feeling in the beginning because my brain was waiting for it. So I started listening to podcasts or audiobooks when I would cook. I would either choose ones that would motivate me and would be about quitting drinking, or I choose ones that make me laugh. These days, they are most of the time ones that make me laugh. I love listening to the Smartless podcast, the Handsome podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs Friends, For Crying Out Loud, and another favorite of mine is the Chalene Johnson podcast. So I can put those in the link to the show notes. Also, obviously, my sense of humor is going to be different than your sense of humor, but it really helps me to be listening to something funny while I'm cooking, and it gives me that buzz feeling. When I'm laughing, that recreates that buzz for me. So I recreated this whole new habit loop when it comes to cooking dinner each night. And I no longer want alcohol anymore because I've replaced all these different steps in the habit loop. So instead of being mad that no one's helping me, I actually take advantage of that time. So I can listen to my podcast and just chill while I'm cooking dinner. I'm still curing the trigger that sets off the habit loop, and I just do it with something else. So now I want you to start going through with your habit loop and start looking at the when A happens, B happens. And usually the B happens is you drink. So you have to start figuring out a different A so that that B can be something without alcohol. You can do this in all areas of your life, and it's going to help so much. Now, this is a super simple concept that I taught you today, and I know that this was a super quick episode, but also know that there's a little bit of work you need to do after this episode. You need to really sit down with those habits that you listed off, and you need to start going through and recreating your new habit loops so you're feeling super strong in your alcohol-free journey. And I also hope you're feeling super empowered in the idea that a lot of the things that happened with alcohol really were habits for you. And you have the power to change those habits now because now you know about habit loops and you can start recreating that. If you want to dive deeper into learning more about habits, I highly suggest that you look into the book that I mentioned at the top of this episode, which was The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And I also recommend the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. I will link that in the show notes as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to go download that alcohol-free checklist so you're all set up with all the strategies and tools you need to be successful on your alcohol-free journey. I hope this shorty episode was helpful and powerful for you on your alcohol-free journey. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and give us a review and rating. All right, I'll be in your ear in the next episode. Thanks for listening.